I'd like to take a moment to thank Mary Grace Shockey, class of 69. Her generosity has made the 108th annual exhibition and several of the past annuals possible. I also want to take time to thank Kathy Muehlemann, Chair of the Randolph College Art Department and Curator of this delightful exhibition, which I hope you have a chance to see. Tonight, we have the first of several programs that are part of the 28th Annual Berlin Symposium. Friends and family of Helen Clark Berlin, class of 58, established the Berlin Symposium in 1991 to honor her memory. The event has expanded the educational impact of the annual exhibition every year since. We have hosted scholars and artists to discuss issues relevant to each exhibition, as evidenced tonight. In addition to the Helen Clark Berlin Symposium Fund, the 28th Berlin Symposium was made possible through the generosity of the following Maier members: Julie Johnson McGowan, class of 69, Allison Mueller, class of 71, and Dana Davidson Redman, class of 1960. If you are interested in becoming a member of the Maier Museum of Art, you can pick up some information on your way out. And just a reminder, the second day of the Berlin Symposium is this Saturday, October 12th, and a full schedule is available on the tables in the foyer. But now I turn to tonight's program. Charles Vess creates detailed, epic, and ethereal fantasy illustrations. His work was featured in many comic book publishers, including Marvel, DC Comics, and Dark Horse. His portfolio includes illustrations for science fiction and fantasy books, including Stardust, for which he created 175 illustrations, The Cats of Tanglewood Forest, and the 2018 release of the books of Earthsea, which I saw several of them walking in this evening. Over the course of his 45-year career, Charles has received numerous awards, which there are too many to name tonight, but I'm going to give you just a few. He's been awarded the Ink Pot Award for Excellence in Comic Art, the prestigious World Fantasy Award. He has won that award 4 times. The Will Eisner Comic Industry Award, which he has won 2 times. He's won a few Chesley Awards, and 2 Locus Awards for Best Artist and Best Art Book. Other accolades are for illustrations in young adult books and the cover art for his first children's book, A Circle of Cats, also won him an award. And just recently in August, Vess won 2 Hugo Awards at the World Science Fiction Convention in Dublin. He was named Best Professional Artist and won Best Art Book for the books of Earthsea. That's about the time I was trying to contact him. So I was feverishly trying to get a hold of him, and he was off winning awards, so that's lovely. He got here anyway. Charles received a BFA from Virginia Commonwealth University, and as a Lynchburg native, he is a graduate of EC Class High School. And there are several EC Class. You're celebrating an anniversary, which I don't have to name the number, that's okay. 50. Charles lives on a small farm in southwestern Virginia where he works from his studio, which is called Green Man Press. So please join me in welcoming Charles Vess back to Lynchburg.
The funny thing with the Hugo Awards, I don't know if you've ever seen one, but they're about this tall. They have a base that's about like this, and then it's a solid metal rocket that's about that tall. So you win the awards, and they want to know, so do you want to carry this home with you, or do you want us to mail it? 2 solid metal rockets going through customs. 60s. And at that time, there wasn't a bookstore, but there was Peter's Newsstand, which had paperback books. The quote-unquote dirty books in the back, and comic books and magazines. I think there was a Lynchburg Art League, I'm not going to name that right, club. But there wasn't a museum. There weren't many pieces of culture to grab a hold of if you wanted to draw. But somehow I stumbled on through, and I've been making a living off of it for a long time. So I'm going to show you a couple quick pictures of what I do now, and then go back through the sort of history. If I hit it right, yes. These are pieces. These were this was a book cover. It was an anthology of stories. I didn't want to paint any one of them, so I just made up an image and put some foxes in there because I like foxes. So when I was growing up, my mom had this book, and this is the actual book, Studies of Famous Paintings. And she had tried to preserve it by covering it in tape. That's some interesting things in it. But this had these flimsy little postcards with really, really bad reproduction of paintings in it. This painting is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and it's a magnificent painting. It's just about as big as that whole screen is, and looks a lot nicer than that does. But each one of these pieces would have this text, and you could read about the artist. And that was the only one, and there are 100 paintings, some of which are really good, and some of which nowadays, when I look at it, I go, why is this in 100 masterpieces of art? I don't know, but that was the only thing I had, so that's what I grabbed a hold of. But in the Sunday papers was Prince Valiant, beautiful drawing, beautiful stories. It was one of the first things I turned to when I was each Sunday. And then I found myself loving fairy tales, but there weren't, I think there were those childcraft books and some other things. But every 7 years, this is before DVDs and VHSs and Betamaxes and all that stuff. Every 7 years, Disney would re-release one of their movies, classics, and you could see Snow White as many times as you could go to see it. Pinocchio was another favorite of mine. Nowadays, I've done a whole lot of research on folklore and fairy tales from all over the world, and I know how simplified they've made the stories. And they're much more interesting when you go back and reread the originals. Also, my brother told me, you have to read these books, these Donald Duck books. We would go every month, we went out to Amherst, to my uncle's. He had a grocery store, a gas station. He'd give us a bottle of pop. And then we'd walk across the street and get our hair shorn. I won't say cut, it was definitely shorn. But they had this big, massive pile of comic books that were in horrible shape. And I would read these, and these were really fun. This and TARZAN comic books. I realized that I liked to read. It was fun. It would put me in another place. Whereas in school, you were, what was the one, Silas Martin, just the one I've never been able to reread because it's so dark. To me, in my mind, it's still dark and depressing. Why would you want to be in that world? I've gone back and reread Charles Dickens and love it. So the Brothers of the Spear, we were in the back of Prince Tarzan. And they were really a strange sort of story where they were set in this sort of mythical Africa. And it was a black man and a white man, and they were blood brothers, and they had these adventures and these weird dogs. You know, those guys are very peculiar looking. And I remember this panel when I came to it, you know, on the Saturday morning before I lost all my hair. And I'm going, oh my gosh, look at this. And years later, I found a copy of the comic and bought it so I could have it. I look at this and go, almost everything I've ever drawn comes comes right out of that panel right there. It's pretty cool. And then on TV, these would have been black and white because we only had a black and white TV set. You know, we grew up hearing people talk about Wizard of Oz that turned into color. Never turned into color for us. It was always black and white till I got to New York City and went to see, they used to show The Wizard of Oz and Singing in the Rain as a double feature. It's the first time I ever saw color. It was amazing. But anyway, Tarzan, loved the comic books. And then I found that there were actually novels written with Tarzan as a character. And my parents would buy me one of these for Christmas, and then one of them 6 months later for my birthday. And again, this Tarzan, R. Edgar Rice Burroughs, and the Donald Duck comics are why I read today. I can't. The Donald Duck comics, I can reread and really enjoy. These, I cannot. They're really not very well written. And, but you put everything you need, there's lots left unwritten, and you just put it in there yourself. It's pretty fun. So again, in the movies, there would be these sort of lurid, you know, the more lurid the better. I'm probably 12 to 14 in this time period, and lurid is good. And you know, and I saw all these stories. This had Kirk Douglas and Anthony. Look at that. But I started realizing it was coming from a mythology, and I wondered what the mythology was. So my mom started taking us down to the library, Joseph Memorial Library. And I had no idea of the various mythical parts of the library that were there, or the heritage that was there, but it was full of books. But I was so shy that I could never ask anyone about what book I wanted. I just had to stumble and find it. By the time I graduated to the adult upstairs in the adult section, the books were all rebound with that sort of fake leather and the gold stamping of the title and the author. But there was no signifier. There was no dragon or spaceship or anything. It was just a book, and you had to pick it up and start reading and see if it was something you wanted to keep reading. But I did find from those movies, I found that there was all these Greek mythology stories full of those stories, the Trojan horse. And this artist, even at whatever, I'd be 14 when I found this book again, but this artist's name is Steel Savage. It could not be his real name, could it? I should look it up on Google and find out. You know? And because I love the Greek mythology, I read the Iliad and the Odyssey twice before I went to high school, because I liked all the mythology in it. And I ended up, because I was such a nerd about all this stuff, I ended up having to answer wrong on the final test because the teacher really, really believed, and I tried to talk her out of this, that it took 20 years to get to Troy and 20 years back, and I was like, no, it didn't. It's 10 years. But you still have to, you know, affect my entire life. So anyway, again, lurid, good. Edgar Rice Burroughs, good at this 14-year-old, 15-year-old. You know, and this is an artist, Frank Frazetta, that I became very enamored of at that time period. And this is actually the first book I ever bought myself, and it was actually 40 cents when I bought it. And I remember it was a little 5 and dime on Main Street, and it was a big stack of books, and I saw Edgar Rice Burroughs' name, and I went, oh, and pulled it out. And I just felt like I tumbled into this world and kept on going. It was really fun. Frank Frazetta, a horror sort of comic. I love this. So this is high school. So I copied it. Guess where I sent this to an art contest? Hallmark. Because what did I know? You know? I sometimes nowadays try to imagine being one of the judges and all that. What does this kid think he's doing? Again, Conan the Barbarian, but it's Frank Frazetta. I tried to draw like him. This was on this paper that my parents would buy me at Sears. It was the only kind of art paper we could find, and it's yellow. And it's the only paper I've ever seen that it's turned white over the years. But I would take a brush. It was a watercolor brush, and I would take a razor blade and cut most of the bristles off and ink with it, because if I tried to use a pen, it would spatter all over the place. And this was, so but because I like Frank Frazetta, I saw this book. I had no idea who Ray Bradbury was, but I went, oh, I'm going to buy that. So, and I bought it. I liked the stories. I started reading some other stories. He became my absolute favorite writer at that time period of my life, still is. And then years and years later, I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and I was displaying the Circle of Cats artwork, and this elderly gentleman in a wheelchair was rolled around, and he went, well, what are these from? And I went, well, it's from this book, this children's picture book. He went, well, I have to buy it. And just at that point, Karen was putting her elbow into my side, and I was realizing, oh my God, that's Ray Bradbury. So we gave him the book, because I would figure it out. Signed it to him, and we corresponded for a few years after that. It was fun. Back in the newsstand, this was the first comic book I bought. I read the number 4. That was issue number 4 of the Fantastic Four. I read that and went, I have to buy comic books. And then I believe I went and pilfered the pennies out of my brother's penny box. and walked down to Peter's newsstand and bought comic books. And Spider-Man, I love Spider-Man. Thor. But at the back of Thor, they started doing these Asgardian stories, which was a huge revelation to me, because again, up until then, the only mythology I knew about was Greek and Roman, and here was Norse, and it's doom and destruction and mighty bravery, and you're 14 or you're 15, and it's perfect. At the same time, in the newspaper, there was an article on 4 young men in Richmond, Virginia that were writing and drawing comic books. And I remember, this came out on a Sunday morning, and I remember trying to convince my dad to drive me to Richmond, find these artists, so I could tell them, like, right. But I did go, it did mean that I went to college in Richmond. And I did find them. These are the artists. There's Steve Hickman, who's a pretty well-known science fiction painter. Michael Kaluta, who I shared a room with for 12 years, or an apartment in New York, and some of the other artists. This is Michael Kaluta's work. Steve Hickman's work. There's a very goofy magazine, Castle Frankenstein, and in it, they started running these artists that, again, this is the 60s. There's no art books on any of these artists. There's certainly no internet. You can't see someone's name with an image and go, oh, that looks great, and put his name in and find 2,000 images all by himself. All you do is see one of these, which were all in that magazine, and go, well, I really would like to see more of this, but there's no place to see any more of this. It was really frustrating. Same thing as this magazine. And they ran a little bit of Aubrey Beardsley, who's a British artist. I really liked this one, so I swiped it. This is senior high school, I think. A guy with, you know, he ends at his knees, I believe. He's pretty short there. These horror magazines were putting in these sword and sorcery stories, and they were really fun. And again, I would have been about 15 or so, but this really was, what would I even call it? It seemed deep and profound when I read this at 14 or 15. But men must adventure, and women must weep. I just laugh and laugh when I see that now. Oh my God, what were they thinking about?
That was the times then, Charles.
Yes. But this is, that's Dale Arden from those stories, and this is from the comic strip with the Ogre's Tower. I did this as a senior in high school on some mat board, and it was pretty big. I don't know how big those things were, but Aubrey Beardsley, the first art book I ever bought. This was in the Easy Glass library. I stared at it for a million years, and I know it imprinted in my brain. I love the drawing, and the stories were really good too. This I found at a retreat, church retreat in Montreat, and it's Joe Baez singing all this bizarre poetry that was really, really eye-opening, or brain-opening. In high school, because I have the homeroom numbers written in the first of this book right here, and I read it each year, so I have each one of my homeroom numbers in there. But these were, they came out, and I was fascinated by especially that cover. They came out each month. They weren't released all at once. This was when they were first being put out. And so I read this book and was desperate to read the rest of it, but I didn't have the money. And so I had to wait 2 or 3 months to Christmas time when my brother, prodded by my mother, bought the next 2 books so I could read them, and then no one saw me for the week after Christmas. This was high school again. This was going to be in the literary magazine that we were trying to think of the name of. What's the name of it?
Crazy Glass?
Curated. This was going to be in that, but they chose at the last moment not to put it in there. It was a 5-page story that I was sort of retelling in Lord of the Rings. 5 pages, just think. And then there are all these books that came out with really strange covers, but I love them. This is still one of my very favorite novels, beautifully written. I got to meet Lord Dunsany is an actual person that lived in Ireland, has a castle named after him, and I met the curator of the castle and the heir apparent in Dublin, and that was really fun to talk to. And they've taken a copy of my book, Stardust, that Neil and I have signed, and it's in there a lot. The Castle Library. Really cool. More books. I'll just sort of zip through. And then in college, I won an art contest, and it was for $15 gift certificate at a record shop. And I bought 2 Moody Blues albums because they were my favorite at the time. And then I determined I was going to buy something. I had no idea what it was. So I walked through the place, and this cover really attracted me. And then I read the titles, and I liked that. So I brought it home, and it's by a British folk rock jazz band called Pentangle, and fell in love with what they were doing with the stories. They're hundreds of year-old stories that have been made new with the music. And it's almost something I've listened to ever since. You can ask my wife about that. Mara Sindek, it's a brilliant book. The art is nothing like what I would ever draw, but sometimes I wish I did draw like this. And then in college, right at the end of it, they started putting out some art books on fantasy artists, Maxwell Parrish, Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth. Were huge influences on everything I was doing. And Arthur Rackham, who is a British book illustrator that did lots of fairy tales and is probably my strongest influence. John Bauer, who's from Sweden, was working about the same time period. It's beautiful work. Most of this, the reason why you see some of these with all the cracks and creases, they're the actual books that I had when I first bought. And this is John Bauer. If you are familiar with the Dark Crystal movie, Brian Froud, he was very, very influenced by John Bauer. This is me in college, and I was in fine arts. And if you put a figure in, pieces became narrative. If it became narrative, it was not art, and the teachers did not not like what you're doing. So I started developing these sort of surreal landscapes, and it's really based on the Crazy Cat cartoon. That'll teach them. I got out of, this is the first piece of art I did after college. It's called When Granny Good Apple Comes Knocking on Your Door. This was a friend of mine, still to this day, Kathy Muehlemann is a really good friend. She opened my mind on all sorts of what you could do in fantasy. And this, when I moved to New York City, I was 26 years old, and this was the first painting I did when I moved there. It was based on a book called Red Moon, Black Mountain, and I just did it for myself. And I was complaining about that with my apartment mate, saying, you know, all I can do is just work I want to do for myself. He started laughing and went, just you remember you said that, Charles, because you're going to get so busy, you're not going to be able to do work for yourself. And it happened for a long time. But I also made my way into doing Spider-Man. This was a hardcover graphic novel that I wrote and drew and painted. I sent him off to Scotland because I knew I'd get really tired of drawing all those buildings and all those windows. And I got to write off quite a few trips to Scotland. Everything but the whiskey drum. I illustrated A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, and Neil Gaiman, the writer, saw this and became interested in doing a reinterpretation of the play, which we did. He had an idea for, he wanted Puck to be this psychotic monkey. I wanted Oberon to be 9 feet tall with red horns and armor and stuff. It was really fun to work with him, and we did lots of more work after that. And this is a Swamp Thing cover, which is just, you get to paint as many roots and branches as you ever wanted. And then Stardust, Neil and I, we were both at this World Fantasy Convention, and we won an award for Stardust for Sandman. And we both went off to our parties, we were drinking champagne. He went further into the desert and saw a shooting star, which if he'd seen it in England, it would have been this sort of obscure thing through all the clouds. But he saw it in a very crystal clear desert sky, and it was bright. And he started coming up with a story, and he came back into town, found me. We walked out underneath the stars, and he told me the beginning of the story of Stardust. And it was like a very hopeful, and do you want to draw it, Charles? So it took years and years to do the book. It has 175 paintings in it, and it became a movie with Michelle Pfeiffer, Robert De Niro, and various people. This, however, was done when there was about 3 paragraphs of text. As a thing to sell to publishers, and I added, like, you know, here's Stardust, because he said she had broken her leg, and she has white blonde hair and little sparkles around it. And that was all I knew at this point. So I put a raven with a key on it. I always wondered what that would be like. There's all sorts of characters throughout there. You didn't use a raven with the keys, did you? A few years later, I self-published a comic book based on the ballads, like Pentangle and Steel Ice Man would do. And then this is work with George Martin. This is From a Storm of Swords, done way before the TV show ever happened. That's Sam Tarley and Cold Hands and the sort of zombie people that are coming together. This is a children's book I did with Neil Gaiman called Blueberry Girl. And this is one called Instructions. If you have the time, you can count out 4 and 20 blackbirds. And this is Rumpelstiltskin up there. This was a picture I did. I was working on a project, and I heard that Ray Bradbury passed away, and I just put all the painting work away and started doodling on a piece of paper, and I ended up with this. It didn't have anything to do with his writing, but I wouldn't have done it otherwise. And then 3 years of my life, or as my wife called this, my bronze mistress. 3 years of my life went into doing this. This is 16 feet high from there up to there. And it's 16 feet around. And it's right in the middle of downtown Abingdon. That's the whole thing. It's Titania holding tragedy, and Puck holding the mask of comedy. And then there's various animals and fairies. It's right across from the Barter Theater. This was a piece I did for a short story by Maier, who wrote Wicked. Gregory?
Yeah.
Gregory Maier, yes. It's based on Baba Yaga, who is this Russian witch that has this house that lives on chicken legs. If she's not bored, if she got the time, she opens the door. If you're not in the door, okay, you're in the dark woods. You see a light. You go toward the light, you notice it's a house surrounded by glowing baby skulls. You go, oh, I'll go knock on that door. As you would, right? You go and knock on the door. And if she's in a bad mood, she hauls you in, cuts you up, makes you the soup. If not, she just slams the door and the hut rears up on its chicken legs and rips you apart. So either way, don't have anything to do with Baba Yaga. Another book that I read long ago that became a pretty cool drawing. This is called The Corn King, and if you sat on my porch in where I live down in Abingdon, this landscape is what you see across the street. And then the corn and all the vegetation all came from the yard. I don't know where the man came. This is a piece, it's a 4 by 8 foot painting. I did it for myself to see if I could paint with this medium and that big. If any of you are familiar with Japanese animated films, all the way through here, there's usually a Totoro in the characters. This is a piece I did for myself. It's called Gathering Worlds, where they're making, this older woman is teaching this young girl to make new worlds out of old, and there's a Totoro somewhere in there. This was from the Earthsea book cover. The first morning that Ged is right here. He's gotten to the island. He's going up here to the wizarding school to learn things. But, that's a sketch for one of the finished pieces. When Ursula saw this, she didn't see it in color, but she saw it in black and white and finished. And she complimented me on my hokusai-like waves, and she was enjoying the dragon. And then she said, then I noticed the sail on the boat, and I wondered why it looked the way it did. And then I realized that it's caught in the backdraft of the dragon's wings. And I thought that was really brilliant, Charles. And this, after I'd done all the work, and I had about a month to decompress, and I was just starting to think about other work, the publisher called me up and said, we found a story in our papers, and we're going to publish it in a book, and we would really like you to illustrate it. And it's the very, very last story of Ged, our main protagonist throughout the stories. And he's on his way to the west to his happy hunting ground, I guess. And the drawing went through lots of changes. I used to have lots of dragons in there, and it was too noisy. And finally came to this, and then I wanted to put this portrait of a thistle in there. It's not mentioned in the story, but she used it in quite a few of her other little moments in other stories. And to me, the thistle became a portrait of Ursula Guin. It looks really pretty, and then if you grab at it, it's going to sting you. So watch out. So it's good. And then this is what I will be out on October 22nd. It's called Driftwood Days, and it's a cycle of seasons. It's done in colored pencil, which I've never done a full book that way before. And I have advanced copies over there. This boy discovers a beaver, startles him, the beaver drops the stick, and the stick starts going down the stream, and it goes through the seasons in the stream. This is from, this one piece goes from winter. This is the stick right there. It's frozen in, and then it goes over to spring. It goes on down the stream. Eventually goes to the sea, washes up on the shore as driftwood, and the boy picks it up and is drawing all in the sand. Oh, that's it. If you've got any questions, holler at me.
I mean, the pictures are beautiful, but they're incredible. It seems to me as an artist detail. I'm just wondering how long it would take you to paint one of those.
45 years. I never keep track. If I kept track, I'd go crazy. I just work on it until it looks right. Then I
I mean,
stop.
a day or a week or,
Sometimes. It really, it depends on what the piece is and what you're doing. And the colored pencil takes a little less time than color painting. But it really doesn't matter how long or how short it takes. It's just whether the image says what you want it to say. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, you're using, you said you used color pencil this time, but before you were using mostly ink, or?
Yes, colored inks, FW ink. They're a liquid ink, acrylic, and you water them down and mix them. And then you can layer 20 or 30 coats down. You can't change your mind. They don't come back up like watercolors.
Right.
They're down, they're down. So. And if someone, if you can put that to sleep or something, if you don't need that. You'll want to open all those things. Yes?
Did you sometimes work on more than one piece at a time?
When you were really desperate, yes. When I was in New York to begin with, I did lots and lots of laundry in the bathtub and ate lots and lots and lots of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And it's just the way it was. Every once in a while, I'd get a paycheck and I'd go to the Chinese takeout and get some spare ribs and some rice and some other things, and it was like a big deal. It was not really easy starting out, but it was, I knew what I wanted to do. I was stubborn. You have to, as an artist, as an illustrator, you have to be, you have to have some talent, but you also have to be really stubborn, and you have to be lucky. But a lot of times I would get a job, especially in the early years. I'd be down at Marvel Comics, and I'd be standing in the hall, and the editor would walk out of the door and go, "You, I need a cover." And it's just because you're standing there. It doesn't matter how you draw. It's just that you're there. So it's something you have to let your ego go away from, because it's not because you're a brilliant artist, but you're there. So, and you get it done on time. That's another thing. Yes.
Charles, I have two unrelated questions. The first has to do with the Bronze Mistress. Did you actually do the sculpture yourself?
I was asked to design it, and I thought I would do a little bit with sculpture. I'd done some smaller things, and it immediately became obvious to me that it was easier to sculpt than it is to draw, which was really bizarre. Because I'd never done, before that was first grade, I think it was a canoe, or an elephant. I think you used to have an elephant head. But, so I said, yes, I'll design it. So I designed it, and I was working with a bronze artist, and his family lived in Mexico, and he would go off, and the people that were the Barber Theater would go, well, we need the base of it. So then I would sculpt the base of it. And it became like 90% of it was me sculpting it. And then I poured the bronze, and then the partner had a quadruple bypass operation. And even when he was standing there and seemed like he was cognizant, he wasn't really there. So he was supposed to be overseeing you probably don't know anything about bronze, but it's like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle that you put together. Like Titania is 9 feet tall. There were 102 pieces of her that should retain the shape of Titania. That you pour as individual pieces of bronze, and then you weld them back together and grind off that weld. But they weren't. They flattened out. So a welder and myself spent maybe 5 months from 6 o'clock at night when he got off his first job till 12 at night, cutting and pasting, basically, this giant bronze thing. And Titania's hips got about 6 inches wider. Maybe it's from birth and all those fairies. I don't know. But it was an interesting experience.
So the second question, which is unrelated, is do you happen to know whether EC Glass has any of your work in their
They
collection?
do, because some people, I don't remember their names, but they came down to my studio and bought a piece to put up in glass.
Great.
So somewhere. Yes.
So I was wondering, when you hear like a story or something, what is your process to get from the words or the story to an illustration, like the composition and the design? Like how does that from the story to the paper?
Well, it depends on the piece, but like the children's picture book, The Driftwood Days, started off with a poem, and it was about 4 pages long, and I just circled and underlined places that I thought were interesting. And then I worked out a really quick sort of pencil layout of the book. It was going to be 48 pages long, so figure out the pacing of it, how much information you're going to put and how much you're not, and all these things. And then I did bigger drawings, because the thumbnails are really for me, and the finished drawings are for the art directors so they can really make their comments. And then I Xerox them whatever size I want them, copy them, and trace them off and repaint them. And that. But it's if you're doing a single illustration, it's just what's the piece in the story that excites you the most, that you see when you're reading it. Oh, I'm going to draw that.
A lot of your pieces feature the magic of nature and the
Yes.
supernatural elements of nature. Have there been any particular lands or places that have inspired you to represent the spirits of that place?
Most places, the woods where I grew up on Langham Road, there used to be an enormous amount of woods back behind there that I spent lots and lots of years climbing through and walking through and devising various ways to get across the stream without getting wet, because if you got wet, then Mom knew you went across the stream and you're not supposed to do that. So, but it was, now it's housing development. But I spent a lot of time in Scotland. When I lived in New York, I would rent, do a job, maybe a Spider-Man job, and rent a cottage and go for a month. And there's hardly anybody there. It was nice. I've been to Spain and France and all sorts of other places. There's always some beautiful, beautiful landscapes. Yes.
Do you think you finished the picture and set it aside and then kind of go back and add to it, or?
If I'm doing it for myself, sometimes I do that, but most of the time it's, you sort of have a sense of you've got there, you got it. You should put it aside and not look at it. I had the guy I shared the apartment with in New York, one day it was 2 rooms, and I heard this screaming and yelling and ripping and rending and all this stuff. And he went storming out of the apartment, slamming the door, and I kind of looked over there. The painting he'd been working on, he had ripped into about 8 pieces, and he spent hours on this. So the next day, he said, "Charles, come in here." And he had the piece he had taped on the back so you could see the whole thing. Went, "That's not bad, is it?" Just turn it to the wall. Don't rip it up.
Yes, I had a question. So from your time of working with marble, was there a certain favorite marble hero
reading them. Did gymnastics in high school. I'm too short for basketball. My hands aren't big enough for football. So I just did, it wasn't anything official, but I just did gymnastics and enjoyed it. And then when I got to New York City, there's this beautiful architecture that's way up high. And it's just would be really cool. And it was a single character. It's not like X-Men where you have to draw 20 million people. So it was really fun to do that. And then when you work for Marvel, every check you get and every letter you get has Spider-Man on the logo. And it's like, And when I did my graphic novel, which is called Spirits of the Earth, I had two questions I had to ask. One was, at that point he was married to Mary Jane Watson, so he kind of showed them in bed together. And the other thing was, they're going to be in a pub in Scotland. Can they be drinking real drinks? And their answer to both of those was, well, it was a hardcover, expensive. Kids weren't really going to get it, so yes, I could do that. Yeah.
What about your time with DC? Like, who's your favorite DC?
Well, Sandman, probably, and Stardust. But the thing, if any of you are seriously considering any of that stuff, Marvel doesn't give you royalties. DC does. I'm still getting royalties. Now it's twice a year from DC for stuff I did in 1991. It's a nice thing. Marvel paid me half of what they owed me for Spider-Man Spirits of the Earth, and they were like, well, just sue us. And that's the way they think, so that's why I'm working.
Hi, I interviewed you for a Swedish magazine over 10 years ago, and you probably don't remember it, but I remember it very clearly. But I remember that you talked about John Bauer and maybe you were going to a convention in Finland.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the landscape and actually getting a chance to look at that landscape. Did it actually,
Yes.
you had it in your head, did it actually look like that?
We went to Stockholm. If any of you have never been to Stockholm, you should. And it's the thing that just surprised Karen and I was that it's a city built on water. And there's you can get on these ferries, boat ferries. You buy one ticket, you get off and on all day, and go all over the city. It's great. Yes. And they had more outdoor sculpture than I've ever seen anywhere, of every sort and every kind. But we went down south to, Jönköping? Maybe. Yes. And which is where the John Bauer Museum was. We stayed in the John Bauer Best Western. A friend of our Swedish artist, that picks us up at the rail station and told us about the John Bauer Trail, which is an official trail that he used to walk on and get his ideas. And it's, you could see all those trolls. It was really great. And then about 2 hours up north was the Carl Larsson house, which IKEA wouldn't exist without Carl Larsson. And it's a beautiful house with beautiful art. And one of the things, the little wonderful undercurrents of it all was Carl in English is Charles, and his wife's name is Karen.
I think that's a good place
Okay.
to stop. Charles.
Oh, yes, wait. And in the next room,
In the next room.
I have stacks and stacks of books in there. And they're all for sale.
And you will be signing books that
And I'll be signing
them.
Well, I just like to say one thing. There's a lot of them are your classmates in this group.
Yes.
And I know that all of us are very proud
Okay.
of you for excelling in your field.
Thank you.